Well, good morning, everyone. How's your day? Good, good. Well, it's about to get gooder. Good to gooder. No longer do we have to hurt to help. Do you realize that? How many of you have to think about, I got to go all the way to the bottom before we change? We've been educated the wrong way. We don't have to be hurting before we change. We can make a change starting today. So, what I'm going to talk about came from a couple of sources. I give credit up here. Burrow Minto was a presenter a number of years ago at Unity Church, and it was my introduction to the church, actually. It's what looped me in, if you will. He also did a tape called God Will Bang on Your Hood. And it was really right up my alley because it's the kind of thing where he taps you on the shoulder and says, this is the direction. Shut up. I know what I'm doing. The next day, he pokes you a little bit harder. Quit that. I know what I'm doing. We don't change until what? Oftentimes until we're hurting. We don't have to do that anymore, and I think that that's really kind of neat. So think of it like this. If you took all the things that were good in your life right now and doubled them, would you have time for bad things in the next 6 months? It's really that simple. And so I've been talking to Sue about this, that if I ever was courageous enough or whatever, or she was, really struck out finding someone else like Mary to fill in, I would do just this service. And so I thought about, putting it into my own words, but really it was such an inspiration in my life. And I've literally heard that service that Burl did, I'll bet 200 times or more. It was that much of an impact on my life. And a few years ago, I was in Billy Ware's Metaphysics 101, and about halfway through the class, it dawned on me that everything Burl talked about in that 20 to 30 minute introduction was everything I'd spent the last 20 years learning. It's just so simple, and yet we complicate it because we think of things as having to be bad before they get better, so to speak. So I've talked about this with Sue, and she said that recently she found a box of tapes that were services that Burl had done. Tom said he remembers when he came here back in the late 80s and early 90s, and that's when I started my journey, and it was all because of this. And so I'm kind of excited for my first time to stand up here and share with you kind of what lured me into Unity, because when I heard the tape, I was like, that's no church. I mean, that's not a church service I had ever heard, right? So it intrigued me enough that I actually had to come and check it out, right? So I listened to, last week actually, Mary said something. She said something like, you're doing this service next week. And I said, yeah, spread the word because, people, heads up, they won't want to come or something. She goes, you need to listen to Sue's talk today. So she's the president. So I went over to the bookstore and I got a copy of it and I was impressed. It dovetails really nicely into where I'm headed this week. And so as I was listening to it, I want to show of hands how many of you actually elected to do the homework that Sue assigned to you. A few of you? None of you? There we go. So what she had talked about, first of all, was being awake and aware. But behind the awake and the awareness was that part of us where we choose to say who I am. And I think that's the power of what I'm going to talk about today, is changing that I am, fill in the blank, with a more negative connotation to an I am with something that is more of a positive connotation. And she talked about who is the I am that I want to bring forth in these circumstances, or this circumstance. In my mind, it's who I want to be in this life. So we're going to talk about taking things and from good to making them gooder. And I realize that it's not really proper English, but for me, it's a good way of thinking. How many of you have ever heard of companies that offer well leave? Some people shaking your head. Some of you are like, what? We all are accustomed to getting sick leave. Some companies incentivize you. If you stay well all year, they'll give you paid time off because you didn't take sick time, which is just turning it around and looking the other way. We have schools for smart kids. They didn't have schools for smart kids when I was little. I was bored to death in school, and the principal will tell you that. But now they have schools for smart kids, IB programs and so forth, because they're kids that excel, right? How many of you would check into a well hospital? Right? We all think, well, I don't go to the hospital unless I'm sick. What if you checked in before you got sick so that you stayed well? It's a difference in the way we look at our perception and the way we look at the world. So the world's ready. We've been trained that we can't change until what? Something terrible goes wrong, and then we all change. The greatest thing in the world to be called is wrong. You can call me mean. You can call me nasty. You can say I'm ugly. I'm okay with that. You come up to me and say, Steve, you're wrong, and I'm like, oh, we're going to fight, right? Being wrong's the wrong thing, right? We don't like that. But the world is ready for us to change. So how many of you, by show of hands, would like to change something in your life today? Okay. What's wrong with the rest of you? You're sitting there thinking, well, let's see, what would I change? And you don't come up with anything because you can't think of anything that you would change, and you never go forward. It's okay to change. It's okay to move forward. It's okay, good to gooder. Not proper English, but it is good thinking. You know, we're lost in a world of positive thinking. Have you recognized that? Yeah. Have you ever met anyone that they're so positive and their life's a wreck? Uh-huh. Yeah, I used to be one of them. Right? I read all those books. I used to read, I hadn't thought about this in years. I used to read Dianetics, for crying out loud, trying to figure out how to change my life, to become better. And I was about 3 years into this journey, and I was out walking with my dog, Bilbo Baggins. We were on a little hobbit journey. And I was having a particularly confusing day, if you will. And I was like so frustrated. And I was like, God, what should I do now? And I remember, just as I'm standing here today, I was stopped in my tracks by the voice that said, stop reading about it, get out and do some of it. And my life began to change. It's really what I'm talking about is getting out and bringing it into the physical realm. So there's a physical, mental, emotional component to it, right? Thinking is what we do in the head, and then we bring it into the mental, but then the physical realm is when we take those actions and move out into the world. So God can only do for you what you do for what? For yourself and for God. We do it together in unison. We do it together in partnership. So mental is when we do it in the head, right? We can affirm and affirm and affirm and affirm and affirm our lives away until we bring it into the physical realm. And so I used to think of it in these terms. Someone had shared this with me one time. They said, you can pray all day when you're hungry that you'd like a cheeseburger, but you're best going to get one if you stop by Burger King. I got to think about it. I got to get my emotions behind it, and then I got to go put my footwork into action. So it's the difference between talking the talk and walking the walk, right? So why do we have such a hard time with this? I think it's because we lack the tools. So the tools here, like on Trip Earth, so if you're going to put a nail into a board, you use what? Hammer. If you're going to put a nut on a bolt, you use I heard some people start to say screwdriver, right? It's a wrench. You screwdriver people, we'll have a private meeting afterwards. You're interesting people. If you're going to put a nut on a bolt, you use a wrench. If you want to move a mountain in your life, you don't blow it up with 40 tons of dynamite, right? If you got a mountain in your life and you try to just explode it, all you have is just a heap of rubble. You got to pull a board at a time, a nail at a time, move a rock at a time. And we use these tools to help us do that. When it's self-destructed all at once, it's just metaphysical dysentery. You can't get anywhere fast. So we're going to use these things called ahas, and it's when knowledge comes from the outside in. Anybody have ahas moments in your life? I was getting a pizza the other day, and the guy was being explained. I think he was a new trainee, and she said, we'll be with you in just a moment. And she was training him, and he was kind of like, huh? You know. And then all of a sudden he goes, oh, I see what you mean. It was an aha moment. So we all have those, right? I have aha moments dating back to the 6th grade. I remember Custard's Last Stand, right? It's stuck in here. I don't think I've ever had to use it, but it's in there, right? It's one of those things, knowledge from the outside, and it comes in. So we want to practice some of those things, and I want to share some of those ahas, some of those tools with you. We seek enlightenment, and enlightenment comes when you have had the experience. When you experience it, we say, aha. So have you ever heard the truth will set you free? That's what I was doing, wandering around looking for the truth that would set me free. And one day it dawned on me. Once you've had the experience, you know the truth. Good, bad, or indifferent, the result is the truth. You do it the second time, that's dumb. You do it a third time, that's stupid, right? Smart, 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 doing the same things over and over, expecting a different result. Stop that, right? It's like the old hee-haw thing. Doc, it hurts when I do this. Well, don't do that, right? So it's one of those things that once you experience it, it's what changes our world. And of course, one of the things that I think's most amazing about the talk when I heard this originally was the humor. And he did a whole workshop on this, like a whole day-long workshop on these tools and these ahas. But the first thing is laughter, right? Laugh, laugh. Remember as a child laughing until your stomach hurt, right? Tears run out of your eyes, and then we grow up, a world of mortgages, marriages, moonshots, arguments, and we take ourselves so seriously, right? We forget how to laugh. So become as the child. You know what they found out about laughter? If you act like you're laughing, it's as good as laughing. It's like harmony to the soul. It's like music. If you don't have all the pieces in the music, it's not as beautiful as all the arrangement brought together. And it's harmony to our souls. So how many of you have laughed until your side ached in the last 2 weeks? 3 months, 6 months, 3 years, 76 years, right? Laugh, laugh. Remember that? I remember being a kid laying on the floor laughing so hard my stomach would hurt. I'd get the hiccups and think I was going to throw up, right? How often do you laugh like that? So here's a little aha or a little tool that I want to share with you. Now, I've shared this with the teen group before. Jessica still won't do it. She thinks it's asinine that I even suggest it. Get up in the morning. As you're getting dressed, look in the mirror and say to yourself for 30 seconds, ha, 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 ha. You do that for 30 seconds, you'll have a day that nobody can pull asunder, right? Because you turn it around, you reframe it, you start to find the things that are on the other side. How?
When you're looking in that mirror, you can do that brushing your teeth. As the foam's coming around.
See? I knew the giggle lady was going to resonate with this. That's right.
It's great.
That's right.
You're not sitting there laughing alone. You're laughing with yourself.
I was very resistant to this for the longest time. Now, if I'm having a bad day, I just go, we got a quiet room in our office. I just go look in the mirror and ha, 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 ha. And it just turns it around. How would you like to be as happy as you get mad? How'd you like to cuss with joy? You cuss with anger, don't you? So what if you cuss with joy? You know, we get to pick the energy. It's positive or it's negative. And we get to pick the energy that we want to express. That's what God said. He said, you get to choose what you want to be. Total freedom to be anything that we wish to be. Bottom line is, that's pure love, folks. That's pure love. We get to make the decision what we want to do. And how do you do that? Many of us don't realize that if we use the same energy that we used on anger for travel, we could what? Go to the moon and back. Use it on love, you could be the greatest lover in the universe. Right? Use it on making money, and we'd all solve the church's financial problems. Because when you use the energy that's used on anger, you're finished with nothing. It's spent and it's gone. So we turn it around, and there's a little simple technique that we'll do to make that happen here in just a moment. So if you have the anger and it's there, what do? Get it out, or let's stop it from getting there. Have you ever heard birds of a feather flock together? Have you ever been depressed and you're around a happy person? What do you want to do? Get away from them, right? You ever been in a room full of 30 depressed people having a good time, and in walks someone happy, and you're like, get out, right? We're having a good time being depressed here, right? It's funny, but that's how it has worked in my life. So recognize that if you're in the type of the world today where you're kind of hurting, and you're a little bit uptight, maybe the rain got to you, or someone swerved in front of you in traffic, or you had some words with someone, you don't identify with what is happening here right now, because if you identify with the goodness, what'll happen? You'll begin to change. So continue to make it okay as we talk about this. It's okay to have a problem. How many of you have a problem you'd like to be rid of this morning? Show of hands. All right? How many of you don't want to admit you have a problem? Maybe you just have a good challenge, right? That's all Trip Earth is problems, right? Good problems, bad problems. How's the only way to get rid of a problem? Solve it. Never. That's working on the problem. Once you find a skeleton in your closet, don't try to figure out how it got in there. Just get yourself a new closet. Right? Don't try to solve it. Don't try to solve the problem. Just find yourself finding that release for the other side. There's a law of physics, for those that are physics people, that says two things cannot occupy the same space at same time. Right? And there can't be a vacuum in nature. Two things cannot occupy same space at same time. So when you have a bad problem, shove it out with a good problem, right? In unity, we call that denials and affirmations. And we can deny it and we can affirm it until we actually put it into expression. So I can think, well, that was funny. He made a dork of himself when he went, ha, 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 ha. But until you try it, nothing's going to change, right? So when you have a bad problem, shove it out with a good one. How many of you ever had a terrible, terrible problem and you worked and worked and worked on it and then the darn thing didn't even come true? How many of you had a terrible, terrible problem and then a real emergency comes along? Completely forgot about the problem, right? I still do that. I was like, what was I so worried about? Well, today I think, what was I thinking about? Why am I in this room? You know, it's like I can't remember from one room to the next why I went in there. Oh, I'm in the kitchen. Must be time to eat, right? I can't remember stuff. But we simply replace it. How many of you would like to have an answer to a problem before we end the service? A problem that you've been working on in your life, just relax, detach from it, and let it go. How many of you realize that worry is probably the strongest form of prayer that there is? And it's also proof that we can meditate. I talk to people all the time, and they go, well, I can't meditate. I say, can you obsess? Can you worry about something? You can meditate, right? Worry is the strongest form of prayer. Anything you worry about will always come true. And what do we worry about? Good things or bad things? What if you demanded from this day forward that you were only going to worry about good things? I'm just so afraid I'm going to be too healthy. Right? You want an affirmation that'll make you more money than you ever thought you'd make? Get up in the morning, look into the mirror and go, ha, 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 ha. And then say, oh my God, I'm afraid I'm going to make too much money this month. You do that for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and watch what happens. Things start to shift in your life. When you start to shift your thinking. Lack consciousness, poverty consciousness, we talk about shifting that. These are the ahas or the tools for us to do that. So this past week, I was at a training for professional development for my job. And we're going to talk about it a lot in the youth department. They're called developmental assets. And I've been enamored with them for years. And I finally got a actual introduction to them by the company that pioneered them. And one of the things that was shared with us that it was an aha moment. I was like, seriously, I got to go research this and look it up. And she said that negativity has been proven to be encoded into our DNA as a survival mechanism. Because as we fear things, we take them on and we take them on and we take them on, and they become negativity in our life. And it's not that we want to be negative, it's that we think we're protecting ourselves. And I was like, wow, that makes so much sense. I understand where that's coming from. So you just keep doing this, and you don't even have to believe it. That's the beauty of this. Because the mind doesn't know what it doesn't believe. So you just start doing it, and before long, you start going, well, when did I start thinking differently? When I started this journey and I said that I had that moment of just start doing it, stop reading about it or talking about it, people started coming up to me and saying, I don't know what you're doing different, Steve, but keep it up because you're different. And it's because I was acting different. I wasn't just talking and reading and pontificating about the latest book that I read. I was actually saying, this is what they told me to do, now I'm going to go do it. And then my world started to change when I did that. It's like the instant healing. When you believe, what happens? As you believe, so shall it be. Done. It's that simple, and you just keep doing that. You continue to do it, continue to do it. So, what does the universe do every single day? All the time. The universe is constantly changing. And that's what we have to do if we want to keep up, is we have to be less afraid to move forward. And most of us are about 3,000 changes behind, right? But if you want to be in the moment, you got to make one change a day, or you can't keep up. And I think the important thing to remember is that it's okay to move forward. It's okay to change. It's okay to have a problem. Show of hands, how many of you have ever had a failure in your life? Glad I came. Room full of people that are wrong about this one. No, you don't know yourself. You've never had a failure in your life. God created no failures on earth. Surprising? I love thinking of it like this. God created no failures on earth. Everything you've ever done is a success. You just had successes that you don't like. Everything is a turning point. Am I stuck in the failure, or am I realizing that didn't work? Turn it around and go a different direction. How many of you have ever had total successful happiness? A day where it's like, oh, I live for this day. And they back up a truck full of more happiness and dump it on you. It's like you're just on fire, right? How many of you have ever total successful depression? It's the kind of, how about delicious, I call it delicious depression. It's the kind that screws you in the ground sideways. It hurts so bad you feel good. And then you just kind of like snap out of it, and God goes, that's the best you've operated in 3 years. Because we turn it around. It's a release, right? So how would you like to find a way to break these things? How many of you, seriously, honestly, have had a depression before? The next time you're in the middle of that depression, just stop and say, boy, I'm depressed. Boy, is this one successful. I haven't been this successful in a long time. And you turn it around, right? Next time you find yourself broke, say, gosh, I haven't been this broke in 3.5 years. Boy, am I successful, right? And we find a way to stop fixating on what the problem is, because it doesn't exist, because there is an answer, and it's okay to make it okay. How many of you want to just get rid of a problem? You know, nature can't stand the vacuum. It says two things can't occupy at the same time. It's as simple as saying, I'm done with this, and I'm going to go there. Remember 2 + 2 = 4? Pretty simple equation, right? But in school, it's as if the problem was as important and sometimes more important than the answer was, right? You work on an equation, you turn it in, and you give part of the problem. The teacher says, well, you knew the problem, half right, 50%. How many of you knew what the answer was, but you couldn't put the answer down because if you turned it in without a problem, the teacher would say, cheating, right? We've wasted a lot of time thinking that we can't have an answer without a problem. It's okay to move forward. It's okay. So some great people did look for answers. I heard some stories. I've become kind of fascinated with Albert Einstein, and not just for the mathematical genius that he was a deeply spiritual individual. And someone asked him one time, what was the nature of problem solving? He says, I don't know. I don't solve problems. I create new law. And people have been trying to figure out what his problem was ever since. People get paid to figure out what Einstein's problem was, and he didn't have one because he was busy looking for the answers of the universe. He wasn't fixated on the problems. They said that he was such an absent-minded person that he'd be stopped in the hallway and ask a colleague, am I headed towards my office or am I going to the cafeteria? And they'd say, well, you're headed towards your office. And he'd say, must have ate then. Because he didn't have time to get caught up in this. His thing was about looking for the answers to the universe. And there really is an answer to everything if we stop looking at the problem. So, now there's two energies within us. There's a negative and a positive. And there's no two energies, a negative for a negative and a positive for a positive. And the energy within you, if they test it, they can't make it positive or negative. We apply the positive or the negative. And what we do is we get our thoughts going, and we attach it to an emotion, and we make it positive or negative, right? So, if we get emotional over something happy, we have a joy attack. If we get emotional over something negative, we have a depression, right? We apply the emotion, and so every thought's a prayer and every thought's an affirmation. So what if you demanded you worry only about good things from this day forward? Next time you're worrying about something, stop and say, is this good or bad? If it's bad, say, I'm done with it and move on. If it's good, say, let's get with it. Let's make change. Let's make things happen. I watched that movie, Inside Out, the animation. How many of you have seen that? I'd heard about it for the longest time, and finally I sat down and watched it, and it's the same thing I'm talking about here. 4 core emotions they talk about: joy, fear, disgust, and anger. And I thought about this. So disgust is a prayer. What if you got totally disgusted about someone bringing you a new Mercedes? Right? You attach negative to that. Someone's going to bring me a new Mercedes. Oh my God, what am I going to do with a new Mercedes in my yard? People are going to talk about me, right? You worry about it. It's going to come true, right? We have a tendency to worry about the negative things in our lives. And the fear. Think about when fear is in your life. When you're afraid of something, it happens right now. Fear is something that we bring in. That's what we do with the negativity. It happens right here and now. You can get paralyzed by fear, right? Because it becomes such a strong emotion in our lives. So how'd you like to have 10% problems the rest of your life? 90% of any problem is the fear of it. 10% is the actual problem. And if 90% is the fear of it, why is it so hard to find the answer? Because we're locked into the fear. There's really only 2 basic fears that I've learned, and I always try to find a third, but I can't get out of this loophole. There's 2 fears I know of: the fear of losing something that I possess, or the fear of not getting something that I desire. And everything else springs from that. So it's okay. When you don't make it okay, it becomes a problem. When you make it okay, it becomes a part of your world. You own it. You're empowered by it, and you can do something with that, and you can change. So we only keep the original of something, and we give away a carbon copy. It's like pay it forward, right? I learned something, I share it with someone else. So I want to practice you giving away a carbon copy here this morning. Turn to one of your neighbors and say, "You're okay." Now turn to your neighbor and say, "I'm okay." See, that feels even better, doesn't it? Now turn to your neighbor and say, "You are beautiful." Now turn to your neighbor and say, "I am beautiful." Can you feel the power in that, right? The power in that. Think of that. That's not only in this room. That's sent to the moon and back, India, Africa. That type of consciousness, positive consciousness, I see John shaking his head. Positive consciousness touches the universe. It simply does it. There's more studies out there all the time about people meditating in neighborhoods that have high crime rates, and they see crime rates go down because they introduce positive consciousness into the neighborhood or into the community. So you tell 1,000 people that they're okay and beautiful, watch what happens. Look at the sky and say, "It's beautiful. It's even raining today, and it's beautiful." Talk to a tree. It won't talk back, but say, "You're beautiful," right? You use vocabulary like that, and what begins to happen in your life? You can't do it once. You got to do it all the time. Beautiful. You're beautiful. I say that at work all the time to people. I say, "Oh, you're okay. You're beautiful." And they're like, "Stop going to that feel-good church." I actually had a woman ask me one day, she pulled me aside, she said, "I hear you go to that feel-good church." And I said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "How do you feel after you leave church?" And she said, "Well, I guess kind of guilty." I said, "You should come to church with me. Feeling good's a whole lot better." You turn it around and look at the other side, right? So you begin to believe that earth is just your vacation. How many of you thought you came here to work? God and I have had a real good talk about this. This is my time off. Think about it. What's 75 or 100 years out of always? This is your weekend. If you're not going to have fun now, when are you going to have fun, right? So it's about changing your perspective. So how many of you have ever been to the Grand Canyon? Go. That may not be your final destination, right? And I hear the guy that dug that had a really big shovel, right? I looked this, and how many of you gone to England before? I looked this up. Round trip. Oh, Colin just got back from England.
It was, now that I think about it, it wasn't England, it was actually Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Well, you were a lot closer than we are right now. You can go to England at the end of July, $600 round trip from KC. Take somebody for breakfast, that'll really impress them. Right? I hear they have tea, right, Colin?
Yep, they do.
So it's about turning it around and going to the other side, because I know what your next assignment is after you get to have fun here. 5,000 years of organic chemistry. Or you can raise mushrooms in a dark cave with horse manure. It's your choice. Pick or choose. Are you going to have fun right now? So earth is just your vacation. And as you begin to believe that this is just about having fun, about giggling, about letting go, about moving on, moving forward, and about change, you begin to believe in this story I heard about Frank Lloyd Wright. And he is hands down one of the most fascinating people I've ever learned about. I love architecture, and I started reading and learning about Frank Lloyd Wright when I was 9 years old. And a lot of this stuff, and actually this story was shared in this tape that I'd heard about. He was a very controversial man. I mean, he was in a lot of trouble a lot of times, my kind of guy. And he was being persecuted or prosecuted over something he had or hadn't done. And the prosecuting attorney said, well, Mr. Wright, just who do you think the greatest architect in the world is? He said, well, I am. Going home that night, his wife said, well, now, dear, don't you think that was a bit much? And he said, what? And she said, he asked you who the greatest architect was, and you said you were. He said, dear, you'll have to remember, they had me under oath. So it's okay to have a problem, and you all are okay, and you all are beautiful.